My name is Christopher Doolin. I'm an abstract painter traveling the world in search of ancient pigments. That's been my intro for the last 2 years now. Unless you watch my last video, what you don't know is that before all of this, I was a sculptor, creating creatures, characters, and makeup effects prosthetics for large-scale theater productions. But in early 2020, I suffered a devastating personal loss. The grief of that loss defeated me. Set against the backdrop of a global pandemic, that pain altered me. While I still felt the need to create, I had lost probably the ability and definitely the desire for any kind of meticulousness in what I created. So the precision of my sculpting tools was replaced by my bare hands and splattered paint. After working through that for 2 years, although I still wasn't ready to pick up a sculpting tool, it was time to give these pieces meaning beyond my grief. That meaning wouldn't involve me simply saying, I'm all better now. I wasn't. What made the most sense to me was to remove my voice from the process entirely and give voice to someone else. Lots of someone else's, actually. So Mary and I made good on a promise we made to each other when we first got together. A promise to create a gigantic life, one full of travel and amazing people and epic experiences. So we quit our jobs, ended our lease, got rid of our cars, and we jumped on a plane bound for South America as the first step in a crazy dream of not only adding ancient pigments to my work, but to live with and learn from the tribes and people groups who have used these pigments and the earth they came from for thousands of years in their agriculture, spiritual practices, ritual body painting, art, and textile dyeing. While living with each of these remarkable tribes, we've learned how to collect and process the pigments properly and with the deepest respect for their land.
This is the seashell that they use.
Their ancestors, their deities and spirits.
This planet has a spirit, and the spirit's name is Nonoki.
As well as themselves. To say that the past 2 years have been healing would be an unbelievable understatement. Mary and I have fallen in love with the world's people and have forged relationships that will last a lifetime. By allowing me to get my hands in the dirt, their earth, they've brought me back to sculpting, to clay, to my earth. I don't know what this process will look like. I imagine it'll be slow at first. What I do know is that, like my paintings, these sculptures will be infused with the earth we collect while living with the world's most extraordinary people. These pieces will depict them and the wildlife that surrounds them, as well as the ancestors, spirits, and deities they teach us about. We'll also continue to visit some of the world's most spectacular places. Places with rich, artistic, natural, and cultural history. We're here just outside Frankenstein Castle, outside Darmstadt, Germany. So where to begin my rebirth as a sculptor? And maybe more importantly, with whom? Who better than the greatest sculptor of all time? So I'm here in Florence, Italy, to walk in the footsteps and sculpt in the shadow of Michelangelo Buonarroti. Florence is a place like no other. This is literally the shop where Leonardo da Vinci bought his materials. And while he was not the founder of the city, and many people came after him and added to its splendor, we owe Florence as we know it to one man, Cosimo de' Medici. Cosimo was a banker who rarely held actual political office. He established the Medici family's effective leadership by, we'll call it, financially supporting those who actually held office, as the religious oppression of the medieval Dark Ages gave way to the Renaissance. The Pope at the time was obviously less than thrilled with Cosimo's influence. In his frustration, he's quoted as saying, "Political questions are settled in Cosimo's house. The man he chooses holds office. He is who decides peace and war. He is a king in all but name." Cosimo was a different kind of leader. He spent over 600,000 gold florins, roughly 500 million of today's dollars, on art. Including Donatello's David, the first freestanding nude male sculpture that had been created since antiquity. The Catholic Church was obviously not happy with it, wanting either a fig leaf placed over his lascivious parts or to have those parts chiseled off entirely. The Catholic Church was not Cosimo's only enemy, and he found himself imprisoned here, in the Palazzo Vecchio, before being exiled from Florence for a year by a rival banking family. As I mentioned, the Renaissance was kind of broken into two camps: the devoutly religious and those they deem the heretics. The strict Roman Vatican contrasting the free thought of Medici Florence. The artists themselves were equally as divided, with Michelangelo's devout, fanatical religious beliefs juxtaposed against Da Vinci's open homosexuality and obsession with the scientific. And that love for science was probably the deepest thorn in the Vatican's side. But it wasn't unique to Leonardo. One of the most famous people labeled a heretic by the church, maybe even more so than Da Vinci, was Galileo Galilei, because he had the audacity to suggest that all of the planets in our solar system revolve around the sun and not the Earth, which we obviously now know to be true, but nevertheless contradicts Scripture. So we're headed to the Galileo Museum to not only learn about his life and study of the stars, but to see his mummified middle finger, which remains raised. We actually had a little trouble finding Galileo's middle finger, tucked away in a glass case full of a bunch of other relics. When we eventually did find it, it was shriveled and mummified but raised high, maybe pointing to the stars he loved so much, or possibly as a final act of defiance to the church that despised and condemned him. The heresy of science continued beyond Galileo's love for the stars and into the more practical, with scientists and hobbyists creating rooms full of what they called curiosities, containing collections of jarred specimens, skeletons and taxidermy of exotic animals, and anatomical wax models of the inner workings of those animals, as well as the human body. Many of which ended up here, at La Specula, Europe's oldest science museum. Not to be outdone by the preserved bodies of the scientific heretics, the Church offered their own answer to the preservation of the dead. Resting in the Dominican Church of San Marco is the mummified body of Saint Antoninus. Dressed in his ornate archbishop's garb, he's inspired devout Florentines to resist the temptation to look beyond the church for guidance for 550 years. In my quest to understand Michelangelo, this strict adherence to his Catholic beliefs can't be ignored. These beliefs were often so extreme that he didn't think the Vatican was devout enough. It was part of him. In his mind, this extreme fanaticism gave his life meaning, though it didn't seem to ever bring him peace. The only peace he ever seemed to find was in childhood. Michelangelo was born with no indicators that he would become the greatest sculptor of all time. None of his ancestors were artists. His father was a financially unstable, low-level bureaucrat. But whether you believe in his God, or destiny, or the flap of a butterfly's wings, with his mother in poor health, Michelangelo was sent to live with a wet nurse, whose husband worked in the nearby marble quarry, the quarry that provided the marble for Florence's artists and architects. In lieu of school, Michelangelo spent the first 10 years of his life playing with the man's stone-cutting tools on the small chunks of marble that he would bring home from the quarry. When Michelangelo was 10 years old, his father moved the family to Florence, which would prove to be something of a trial by fire. Angry, arrogant, and made fun of for his unattractive appearance, his face was marred by a smashed and flattened nose which was inflicted on him by another young Florentine artist after Michelangelo's arrogance got him in trouble. So this is my favorite heretic Leonardo da Vinci. The irony of my obsession with da Vinci is that he didn't particularly respect sculpture as an art form, and I think a lot of that came down to his abhorrence for Michelangelo. They didn't get along, they didn't like each other. The Uffizi Gallery is home to 3 Leonardo paintings, including a rare completed piece. As well as the only painting Michelangelo ever created on a wooden panel, entitled Tondo Doni, which simply means circular painting for the Doni family. It's also home to Botticelli's famous painting, The Birth of Venus. Michelangelo's early works in Florence revealed a mastery of form and anatomical precision that was far beyond his years. His natural talent and his ability to carve lifelike human figures in marble gained him increasing recognition. He truly saw it as his mission to take the skill and beauty of the ancient pagan Greek and Roman sculptures and apply it to the themes and characters of the Bible. In the early 1500s, Michelangelo began working on his most iconic of those biblical characters, displayed here at the Accademia Gallery. A piece that would not only define his life and career, but stand as an icon of the Renaissance itself. Michelangelo would eventually move to Rome and create the second of his 2 most iconic works, the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel in the Vatican. And yet another example of the fact that he was a complicated man, his religious devotion to the church did not extend to the Pope who commissioned him. His relationship with the Pope was so toxic that it resulted in the Pope punching him in the face at one point, causing Michelangelo to walk off the job. The Pope issued him an official apology, which was unheard of at the time, and Michelangelo returned. Ironically, despite his religious differences with the Medici family, he willingly returned to Florence and sculpted the shared tomb of Il Magnifico, Lorenzo de' Medici, and his brother Giuliano, housed here at the Basilica di San Lorenzo. Now that I've walked in the footsteps of the greatest sculptor of all time and seen many of his works, including the most famous sculpture he ever created, it's time to meet him here at the Basilica of Santa Croce, where he's laid to rest, along with other famous Florentines including Dante, Machiavelli, and Galileo. One of the worst pieces of advice I ever received was from one of the creatives I respected the most. He was a theater professor. He knew that I drew and painted and sculpted, that I had sang professionally for almost 20 years. His advice was to simply pick the one that can make you the most money and abandon the rest to focus on it. Michelangelo's tomb reads sculptor, painter, and architect. What that professor neglected to teach me was that different art forms can serve you differently in different phases of your life. I'm a sculptor at heart. That's who I am. But without the abstracts I've been painting for the last few years, I would have never worked through my grief as effectively as I have. And without now returning to sculpture, I simply wouldn't be moving forward. In my time here, it's one of the differences I've realized between Michelangelo and myself. Although I've had my struggles, Michelangelo was a tortured man that never seemed to find peace. My hope with this sculpture is that in eternity, he finally did.